Hello, everybody. John Sharp here, one of the full-time faculty in MFA Design and Technology, and I guess more generally, Design and Technology program at Parsons School of Design. A little history before we get started. This is part of the Cloud Salon lecture series. This is a Zoom webinar that our colleagues started back in the spring of 2020, in April 2020 to be specific. You can imagine the particular moment that emerged in. We invite artists and designers and technologists and professionals from a wide range of different creative industries to present projects, um, largely characterized the folks we invite who are doing work around social justice, the environment, have critical practices connected in some way to the broad fields of design and technology. And one of our hopes is that this can be both a presentation and a conversation. And as such, we try to leave ample time for questions from you all, the audience. Um, we'll go over the ground rules of that participation in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to welcome Marina Zurkow, our guest today. A word of warning, perhaps. Marina and I have known each other for longer than either of us would like to perhaps acknowledge in numeric form. We have been both friends, we are friends, and we have been colleagues over the years. At least right now we're friends, Marina. We'll see where we're at on the other of the hour. Marina has had a really wide-ranging and, in my mind, impressive career. She is an artist represented by Bitform's galleries, where she's had a number of solo exhibitions over the years. Um, when I first met Marina, she was working primarily as a visual designer and animator. Most of her work, really, in the I know the last decade or so, is dealing with the wicked problems that are climate change and the environment. Hopefully, that is not a controversial statement to make, Marina, about your work. I think in the course of Marina's conversation, we're going to see a really impressive range of creative output, visually driven in nature, pretty much in every case, utilizing computational technologies in often more than one form. And with that, I'm going to hush and I'm going to turn things over to Marina.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, John. Hi, everybody with just names, no pictures. I'm glad to be here. It's a little strange to say anybody's faces, but now I won't feel bad about sharing my screen and becoming just a small head myself. I'm going to start by putting a chat in the link to a project that I'm not talking about today, which is at the very fancy Museum of Modern Art until March. And I'm really excited about this because this is a part of my practice. I tend to be divided in terms of, oh no, John, could just please stay on, please. Don't leave me alone here. Thank you. I need to talk to someone. Thank you. You can eat. I don't care. My practice tends to be divided between the more spectator-oriented, spectacle, I hate that word, but I'm going to say it, more spectacle-oriented work, which is what I'm showing you today, and then what is very squarely in the field of participation design. And I've been working on this project called Investing in Futures with Sarah Rothberg, who is also a software-based artist who teaches at ITP. And we've been working on this project for 7 years, and it's a constraint-based game to design worlds you want to live in. So it's a world building framework. And we're really excited that it's at MoMA through March as a standalone experience, which was really challenging to develop. So there's no docent, there's no facilitator. It needs to be a 15-minute experience. And I think we nailed it in a way that was really made me and Sarah each individually go there and want to cry because the quality of interaction was so high. And usually if you make an interaction design project, you're lucky if somebody like leans forward, impatiently draws something and leaves, and it's not really very interesting. So I hope you can experience it. And if you have any critical or other feedback, you will share that with us. We would be grateful. Okay. So that's that. And I'm going to start. I guess I'm going to close the chat so I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to start by sharing my screen and showing you some work and kind of talking through process a bit. So this is my website. It's called omatic.com. It's an old name. It's been called this since 2002, and I've just never bothered to change it. It's kind of a silly name. It doesn't mean really anything anymore. But I'm going to start with this project called Hudson Follies that I completed last year. And it was a commission for Google's Pier 57 private lobby and event space that's next to the Chelsea Market in Manhattan. Then the commission was given to me in 2021. I actually, Jesse, if you want, there's a link to the original proposal in there, which was a text-based proposal. This is kind of an important, I was asked to sort of share a lot of kind of case study process material with you. So how do you get from nothing to something, as I used to think about this? And I actually teach often a class that now is called Critical Experiences, but used to be called the Temporary Expert. You know, how do you get from nothing to something? How do you both do intensive research and iterate visually? And visual work is often much more instinctive. I don't illustrate my research. So I often think of this as having two tandem lines of inquiry. One is more instinctive and experimental, either visually or audiovisually or what sensorially, and the other is really grounded in both scholarship research, scholarly research, ethnographic interviews. I do a lot of interviewing of people informally, and then, you know, your everyday Googling, which I learned a long time ago was inadequate. And you basically, if you live in Google, you will create all kinds of repetitious biases and never be surprised by anything that you find out. So ethnographic interviews are really great. Getting out in the field whenever you can is really important to me, although neither of these works required extensive field research. This one did more than the other. So, okay, so with that said, so I had written a proposal for Google, and it wasn't a lot of money, but it was this really gorgeous space. Man, it looks like a 3D model. Diller and Scofidio renovated this landmark pier, and they gave me this, you know, bajillion-dollar screen for as long as, I mean, it's still up. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere. You can stand 8 inches away from the screen, and it's tremendously detailed. This is 40 feet wide. And when I first started showing them pictures of what I wanted to make, some bad things happened. So let's see. I'm going to show you a couple of sketches. So there's a link Jesse can share to some of the early interviews and the early interviews that we did. We paid futurists and New York City experts to talk with us about a speculative future. So the original proposal was to do a piece about the Hudson River, since the pier is on the Hudson River, and to be able to ask some questions about the past of this river, the present of the river, and the future. And the structure of the piece was going to be that the past would roll in from the left and the future would roll in from the right, and the present would be this amalgam of these two speculative time experiences, okay? So John, if I'm not being clear, just say, can you clarify, okay? And so I identified through this work, so you can see these were really early sketches, and I'm showing this to show you how much the work has changed. So early sketches thinking about the river as a constant. And, after I did so much research on the sort of geological history of the river and the occupations, the sort of indigenous occupations of the river, and then the history of the slave trade coming around the same time as Henry Hudson, who the river is now named after too. The river used to be called the Mohicantuck, which is the Lenni Lenape name, the indigenous name for this river, which means the river that flows both ways, because it's a tidal river. The ocean flows almost all the way up to Albany. It gets obviously very diluted by the time it gets to Albany, but that tide is huge. And so this idea of two-way movement was really interesting to me, and I wanted to base this piece on that. So this was like the first round of sketches, and they were like, oh, we hate this. It looks very computery. We want a more immersive experience. So I said, okay, this is the problem of only submitting written things to people, not pictorial things to people. So then we started looking at real-time data. What could we put in the present that we could generate some software? So we is my now full collaborator, James Schmitz, who at the time I had just hired to help me with this, but he was such a tremendous contributor to the project that he now owns half the rights to this and to the other project that I'm going to show you next. So this, you can see it's already starting to transform. I'm still thinking about the past where there were walruses, and this was just after the last glacier receded, and the Hudson River was formed by an ice dam at the Canadian border that busted, and all that water flew out of Canada and clay and other materials and created the Hudson River Canyon. So it was like an incredible story. And I had identified these periods of time, 10,000 years ago, the end of the Ice Age, 500 years ago, colonization and Henry Hudson's arrival, 150 years ago, the industrial era, and then 50 years ago to the present, late capitalism and environmental awareness, which really started in the 1970s with Nixon signing the Clean Air and Water Act and with the building of the World Trade Center. So these were sort of these signal moments that I identified, and they said, okay, let me interview people and see what could happen in 50 years, what could happen in 150, 500, 10,000 years, right? So this was the really speculative part of the work. So I'm showing this to Google, and they're like, they're starting to say, well, I don't think you can do this. They didn't say it even that nicely. They were like, you can't do this because you're going to talk about slavery and you're going to talk about colonization. And in fact, I don't even know that we want you to talk about indigenous people killing mastodons because somebody might be triggered in the lobby. So I was like, wow, okay, so if you hired me I'm going to be really frank, and this can go on the record, that's fine. You hired me to create work and you know my work, and now you're basically manacling me so that I cannot make a piece that has any politics at all, right? They're like, basically, yes. So I changed my approach completely. The interviews with people were gone, the speculation was gone, the past was gone, the future was gone in a way. And I gave them a shopping list. And I said, okay, so this is all the assets that we're going to put in this piece. These are all of the animated assets that we will put in here. Fish, birds, origami birds, scuba divers, weird tourists with hanging from buoys, all these kinds of boats and different kinds. This is the trash gobbler from Baltimore. So I did a ton of research on water vessels and barging, and all of that was fine. And I made sure that I threw in here a few wild cards. This is Robert Smithson, the artist's recreation of the native forests of Manhattan that was traveled around on a barge that the Balmorey Associate Architects had put together after he died. And a food forest on a barge, which is an homage to Mary Mattingly's swale. So there was like a lot of stuff in here, and they were like, great, 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 great. There were some animals that were dead, now extinct. We had hunted the beaver to extinction, the elk to extinction, and those were symbolized by sitting on top of these plastic water bottle rafts. Okay, that's all fine. And some speculative fun stuff, and then all this underwater reefs, which I did a ton of research with the Hudson River Park Trust educators and leadership on how oysters were being brought back and what kind of structures they needed in order to exist in the river. And then some crazier things like an homage to Archie Graham, the visionary architects in the 1960s, this tubes where you could go bicycling underwater and see the environment. And then I threw in some things I knew they would kill, like drones. And I did that so they would have something to kill from the project. Say like, oh yeah, no drones, can't have any drones. So I was like, great, I knew that, no drones. So, all right, so that all happens, and you can see, I'm not going to show you the clips right now because you can see them your own you can see them on your own in the links, you can see the walkthrough. You cannot go up there. This is not public. This is the other thing that I was unaware of when I accepted the commission, that this was a private space. So you can stand where the camera is in this shot at the bottom of the ramp, and you can kind of see the piece, but you can't go up into Google without permission. So I have some clips, some video recordings here of this work. So I deliver the work to them. I think that's let's see. I want to show you this. Oh yeah, okay. So part of my research, there's an assets list that I put together with the educators of the Hudson River Park Trust. This is the last piece of detail on this. Part of this was figuring out the fish come in from the left when they're coming in from the ocean, and when they're have finished spawning and they're going back out to sea, they come in from the right and they pass to the left. And I had to do this whole spreadsheet. Do they come at day? Do they come at night? How high in the water? How low in the water? So all of the ecological research is true, is realistic for the present day Hudson River. And so the piece is really, I kind of wanted to name it Happy Hudson. There's like nothing controversial in it. It's nothing critical about the work. And in a way, it's just a very pleasant piece about the Hudson River. There's a few Easter eggs in there, like Henry Hudson's ship comes in at like half scale, because there is one, it's called the Half Moon. And occasionally Henry Hudson appears as a ghost in one of the sails, and a tear falls out of his eye. But it's a very lighthearted piece. And the software is a Python-based software that Jim wrote that is highly schedulable, like down to the smallest instance, at 12:02 next year, something could happen. And the weather is all real time in the work based on local weather station that's near to Pier 57. And the title information is inputted into the piece, and on April 1st the whole piece turns upside down, and that's fine with them and all of that. And the reason it's cited in such a way, if I go back to the work, let's see. So you're facing the Hudson River here, and this is the continuum of what you see out the windows on the right and the left. So you're literally looking at the Hudson River, and then to your left, the ocean, right, as it dumps out into the ocean, and to the right is upstate and north. So the piece just sort of takes a slice out. And so it's successful as a formal piece. And then I made sure that I owned all my intellectual property. And I made another version of the piece that we've been exhibiting as a single channel work. It's obviously a pauper compared to the presentation at Google, but it is a 4K, single 4K piece. It is a version of the other work with an addition of many of the assets that I was not permitted to put in the piece. And it's called Does the River Flow Both Ways, with a question mark, because it's really taking the title, the Mohicantuck, the original name of the river, and asking whether in our utopian visions of cleaning up the Hudson River and creating a more equitable future, are we really going to do that? Or are we going to pay lip service to that, but continue at pace with a kind of late capitalist momentum? And so the piece is a bit of a critique of, again, it's a light, funny piece, but it is a critique of kind of green capitalism. And there are a lot of characters in here now that weren't in the original that are represented in different ways, like there is a slave ship, and it's all of the monuments to the past are shrouded in little mists that they carry with them across the stage. And so you can recognize them as sort of ghosts as opposed to real things. And so the piece sort of tries to categorize various assemblages, I guess I would say, assemblages of form. And that's what the piece is. So John, do you want to ask anything before I move on to the other work?
I just less than ask than to sort of underline the procedurality of the piece, right? I feel like that's when you're looking at this, you could just see it as this beautiful, detailed animation, which in fact it is. But there, I can remember when I was looking at it, and it was a rainy day in the evening, and it was a rainy evening in the piece. And until you told me that well, that's because there's real time data here, I wasn't aware. So anyway, I just want to underline that for everybody. This is procedurally um, sequenced, I guess we could say.
You can tell from the way I talk about this work that I want to give a little history. I used to make completely controlled animation work, and I grew very impatient with the limitations of that and really never cared so much about controlling a narrative as I did about building a scene. And that the building of a scene was going to be way more interesting if I employed procedural, probability-based procedure. So I started working on procedural animations in 2009, and I never overplay the algorithmic explanations, but of course the work is completely code based, and I don't write the code, but I have to input all of this work into into code formats. And Jim is so amazing that where I used to have to animate, let's say this flock of fish that you see here, I would control, because I didn't have anyone as good as Jim to do flocking algorithms. Now we have flocking algorithms that cluster, numbers of animals, how far, or numbers of things, how far apart they are, how close together, how many there might be. And then this range of possibility happens. So the piece is partly by design, just a algorithmic probability. And then part of it is real-time data that's represented in the work. Yeah.
Marina, do you mind fielding some questions on the fly?
No, not at all.
Okay. Jonathan in the chat asks, do you naturally work in such a procedural manner, or do you have to train yourself to do so?
Oh, what a good question. Wow. Okay, this is a kind of conceptual answer, but I think that I'm somebody who always thinks in systems, and a system is basically a container with probability that the animated characters, let's say the container is an ecosystem, and all the animated characters are factors of the weather and the wind and the different kinds of animals and the soil and the quality and the minerals in the soil and all of that, that those have emergent properties that interact. So yes, I would say that I fundamentally, and I have trained myself in that. So I might have naturally had that, but then I audited a class in 2013 called Systems Thinking for Designers at Pacific Northwest College of Art with a really incredible teacher. I spent 18 weeks, did all my homework, and really came out the other side of that class quite transformed, so that whatever was latently inspiring to me to think about scenarios as emergence was really just beautifully unfolded through that. And in fact, the Investing in Futures project that I put the link in the chat to is a really, especially our workshops are asking individuals to navigate between the systemic and the personal in really explicit ways. Like you're world building systems. And when you're a person in those systems, all kinds of other properties emerge that have to do with your own history, your own cultural, socio-cultural context, and so on, that really inform the way that you then interact with the systems that you're designing. So yes, that's a long answer, but I hope that's useful. I don't know why I stopped sharing my screen. I can't see anyone anyway.
Or proceed with your
That was
your
it.
presentation then.
Okay.
Oh wait. Oh no, that's Jesse. So never mind. Keep
Okay.
going.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to clean up a little. So now I'm going to switch gears because I don't want to take, I guess my time is almost up. So in terms of, right, John?
I mean, I think it's okay if you go another 5-10 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to try to be
Up to
quick
you.
about this. Should I focus on, I'm just going to say, I mean, you can look at this work. There's a lot of writing about the work. There's a lot of preparation that goes into thinking about this work. A lot of it is on my website. So this was a show from last December called Whirlwind. And the title of the show comes from this image that I asked Midjourney to make when Midjourney first kind of came out. Well, when I first found out about it. And I had asked it to make, I wish I could, it was a World War II agitprop, which is agitation propaganda, World War II lithograph poster of ecocide and climate change. And this was like the first thing it gave me back. I was like, I just hit the jackpot. I thought it was just such a remarkable version of what I was thinking. And it gave me this title. I did not write this. So it was a brilliant thing. And I let it sort of dictate the ethos of the show. So we made this mural. This was in the window. And then you see all these personal objects over here, mysteriously over there, and this little globe. And let's see. The centerpiece of the show was this triptych in the middle, which is, if you looked at all three sides, forms part of a globe. And the globe is depicting, I'm going to just skip to version 2. There's a lot of work. There are a lot of entries on my website to this piece because it's been iterated. So the piece is this globe, and the globe is taking NASA data of high atmospheric winds in real time and fire data that's updated every hour from National Oceanographic, NOAA, which has heat sensor satellites that are picking up phenomena on the ground above a certain heat temperature threshold. And what you're seeing also is these little things, they're hard to see in this image, are fossil fuel and biomass burning energy plants that are based on the Global Energy Monitor data of their particular geolocations around the world. And there are a lot of funny anecdotes about this work. There are a lot of angry nations, and it's a very funny thing because, let's see, I'm going to just put it on a little bit more detail. The fossil fuel plants are emitting particulate pollution in the correct volume for their size. And those pollutions are taken up into the high winds and moved across quite large pieces of the atmosphere before they dissolve. And the purpose of the piece was to visualize this shared airspace and to look at PM 2.5 parts per million pollutants, carbon-based pollutants that are emitted primarily by these two sources. We're not looking at cars, we're not looking at cows, right? We're just looking at two things in order to, in part, talk about an argument for planetary politics, to get beyond the nationalism, right? It doesn't matter who's emitting it. We're all I mean, it does matter who's emitting it because we need to fix it, but we're all sharing the results of these, problematic pollutants. And those include fire, which in many cases is human caused. So maybe I will leave that piece at that and say there's one other component to this piece I would like to share with you, which is that the piece was I just showed you version 2.0. I could say a lot of things about the technicalities of this piece. AI created all the factories. The fire was based on a processing sketch so we had diverse fire. The first version of this was not. The version of this that John, you saw in the gallery was 3 different sizes of fossil fuel plant and some film clips of fire that we stuck onto the globe. And the globe was generated by Midjourney, again, a kind of papery World War II aesthetic. And then the photographs that are spotted around the gallery are related to the piece that I said there was a jumble of objects in the front. So these were personal possessions of mine that had come from all over the place, whether I had gotten them or I had been gifted them. And they, see, what am I going to show you? I'm going to show you this catalog because I don't really know what else to show you quickly. These personal possessions for me tell a little bit of the story about massive, incomprehensible geophenomena, whether they're human caused or not. Volcano, a landslide. This is the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and the material that was deposited. Volcano, floods in Jiangxi, China in 2020. This is what are called cloud streets forming over the Arctic Sea, right? So these huge geological phenomena kind of put up against these little still lives of things that are just basically trinkets, souvenirs, things I made out of ceramics, like these, I made a bunch of things out of ceramics, house plants, everything sort of in distorted scales. And I was really interested in the juxtaposition of this, for me, very personal, almost altars to globalization, as close as globalization in the domestic, in your domestic midst, this globalization you never think about. I was really interested in the personal quality of that against the coldness and the kind of horror of that globe. So I think I'll leave it at that. I feel like I kind of covered what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Marina. That was awesome. A question just popped up from Mateus. How much does having a physical component to a piece affect the physical outcome? I think this is in relationship to the exhibition you're just talking about. How different of experience would you say it is to interact with something virtually from a screen versus being in person at the exhibition?
Yeah, also, great question. So think about scale. Scale is a big issue. That globe is going to be presented next month as I'm not sure it'll be the whole globe or partial globe. We have to try on a 14-foot wall indoors in a museum. That's context and scale, okay? And then it'll be a disc, the whole globe as a screen around, rear projected screen in Detroit in April. So those are big scales where you encounter the sort of size of something. In a way, the question's tricky. It's very self-apparent in a way that scale can really make a huge difference. And I'm very interested in this question because I want to put that globe online as a teaching aid for people talking about both the socio-political and the climatological aspects of this kind of transnational pollution. And when I had applied last year, and I had applied for a grant because the cloud rental time is expensive. And we need to get paid something for the work. The panel, we made it to the final round, and the panel said, we just couldn't picture how you would translate that triptych, that beautiful triptych, into a flat website. So I'm going to reapply this year, and I'm going to have to really make a website that feels as compelling in its own little small scale as that. And I have some ideas, because if you look at the Whirlwind exhibition post on my website, in the front next to the mural is a tiny iPad screen that just has the globe on it. And it's the reverse of the large. It's like the thing you can hold in your hand. It's that cliche imagery of thinking you can cutify and control these problems. And so I think there's a way to play with the diminutive as much as there is to play with the maximalist large spectacle form. But the large one was really cool because at the opening, somebody walked in, they said, "Oh my God, I'm from there," and like just had the ability to pinpoint exactly where in Kashmir they were born. And that was really amazing because there's no nation states, no cities, nothing is labeled on there. But there's a kind of recognition of being this sort of satellite eye that's really interesting at that scale.
Cool. I didn't say this earlier, but I'll say it now. If folks have questions or comments for Marina, you're welcome to raise your little Zoom hand so that you can speak. You are also welcome to just type questions or comments into the chat. Both are perfectly fine with us. Before somebody asks a question, I want to ask one. Marina, it's quite clear from your presentation that you are doing a lot of research into various science-derived data sets and sort of ways of understanding the world. And a word you used, I think it was some point you were talking about the accuracy of the models, right? Or the ways in which things are represented. For example, the fish are going in the right direction, right? Why is that important to you to bring that realism or accuracy or authenticity, whatever word you might use?
Yeah, it really is dependent on the situation because you by making the fish go in the right direction when like the big eels, the adult eels come up the river and the baby eels come down in the spring, you are teaching people, I mean, in a sense, it is pedagogic work. You are teaching people to appreciate the river, what you can't see underneath it, by using real data that's verifiable. All right. But there are, and with regard to the high winds and the atmosphere, this thing we can't see, to be able to lean into veracity is really interesting. However, just because you lean into, you can't, if the piece is abstract, you say, but the data is real, and I don't know why no one's believing me, that's on you. Because I learned in the first version of the breath eaters, the globe piece, we didn't have visual believability because of the way that we clustered the fossil fuel energy burning plants. And because of the way we clustered it, I now have 32,000 followers, most of who hated me on Instagram for something I posted that showed how dense the pollution producing plants were in India. And America looked clean as a whistle, which it isn't, because once we realized our error of how we clustered the data and fixed it, America doesn't look so great anymore. But people don't realize that per square foot, the density in a country, so China, so just so you know, 53% of the PM 2.5 from energy emissions comes from China. 15% comes from the US, 14% from India. These are estimates. I can't recall exactly, but these are pretty close. But India is a third of the size of the United States. So of course it looks denser. And no matter what I said about it's irrelevant, it's not me versus you, their response was, yeah, but you're a colonizing white, terrible person. And so we don't want to listen to you. So it was a very interesting lesson of what it meant to say, but it's true. And then you're like, no, it's on me to fix the visual believability as much as the truth of that data.
I mean, it's so interesting of that wrestling with veracity has become an aesthetic value of your work in a lot of ways, right?
Well, in those two pieces, I'm working on a new piece called The Earth Eaters, which is a piece about extraction. And I have no interest in veracity, visual veracity. I have interest in an emotive sense of what it means to wound the planet through extractive practices. And we're using data to sort of compress all the extractive places in the world into one field that you can explore. And the piece doesn't look like a globe. It looks like topographic lines, and it's a collage, and it's like a very different experiment using data. I really was very uncomfortable with this truth thing. I didn't ever make work about truth until the last couple of years, really. I was using algorithms for different reasons, emergent theater, basically. But this is still theater. It's just theater that also has a kind of documentary background to it, if you would.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, I will continue to ask questions in the absence of other questions.
Yeah,
Um,
where's all the questions, people?
um, I'm super interested in I mean, back when I met you, um, I don't recall us having conversations about climate change and the environment. And certainly the work I remember you doing at the time were, websites and album covers and animated pieces. Um, and I'm curious how your attention was drawn to the environment as a sort of a subject matter to explore through artistic practice.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. I got an answer. Um, so I was doing work just after I met John on prepubescent girl, feminist work on prepubescent girls and these kind of mutating creatures that were part animal, part human. And I was really interested in the animal world, but mostly in a pretty typical way of instrumentalizing animals to talk about human emotions and kind of doing the typical thing. And um, in 2004, I made a piece called Nicking the Never, which was based on the Tibetan Wheel of Life as allegories of like trials and tribulations of being a young person. And it was, again, a young girl. And I had a lot of animals in that work. And I was starting to feel uncomfortable with that strictly metaphoric use of the ecological range of earthlings that we are. And concurrently, let's say 2005, my studio in Brooklyn started flooding all the time. And I had renovated this garbage filled backyard with drought resistant plants because didn't rain that much in the summer. And now the rain was like coming in, and the sewage in New York, again, it's a systems problem. The sewage in New York couldn't handle the amount of rain. And so the rain was coming into the studio and puddling up at the lowest point in the studio, which was like under my desk chair. And so same year that An Inconvenient Truth, the Al Gore PowerPoint movie, came out. And that movie really, I hate to be that person who's like, that movie really woke me up. And same year, I get my first hurricane evacuation maps from the city of New York. I grew up in New York City, so this was all like really close to home. And then I'm listening to this, Gore go on about climate change really before a lot of people were talking about it. And I felt like I had come home to some issue that I could never look away from. Simultaneously, Donna Haraway is gaining popularity. Books on animal studies as a subset of environmental studies, both the kind of hybridization of science and the humanities through these minors in schools was suddenly coming into blossom. And I decided that I was teaching full-time at ITP by 2008, and I wanted to teach a class on animals that wasn't going to be like, let's use them to talk about ourselves. Let's actually learn about animals and try to develop some consciousness about how all the forces of the planet deserve to be thought of as agents, in a sense. And this, of course, is Bruno Latour, actor network theory. And I was reading a lot. And it was again, like I had come to my philosophical home. So that's really how I got into this, was feeling like all this time I just felt like it's never left. I mean, that feeling is now old, right? 2007 is a long time ago. And I'm still like full steam in that space and learning new things. And again, like dimensioning that work. There's just very rich space for me.
A question just arrived. You have Arden asked any philosophy recs or theory recs? Who are your faves and what are you reading right now?
Um, okay, I really recommend looking at Feral Atlas, which is a website authored by Anat Singh and her collaborators. Anat Singh, I think, is a really good recommendation of somebody writing about feral landscapes and how to interact better ecologically. Um, I'm I'm just thinking about what I'm teaching world building in a humanities program at NYU right now. So I've been really thinking a lot about kinship, and economics, unraveling how, getting away from this singular view of economics as trickle down economics, for instance, and sort of trying to find new ways to talk and think about regenerative economics. I'd look at Kate Rayworth's work. She wrote Donut Economics. And I think she's just a very vibrant person to be talking about regenerative economics. She's got a lot of energy for that. I just finished a really amazing book called The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating, which is a medical memoir about a woman who's bedridden with chronic fatigue, I think is what she had. And someone gives her a snail. And so she lives on like snail time for a year. And then the snail has little snail babies. It's a remarkable book that's both her own kind of considerations of time and what it means to be disabled. You definitely is in the disability space, but it's also in the ecological space and the hybrid humanities science space. She does a ton of research in both literature and scientific research. It was a great read. And then I also highly recommend James Bridle, his book, Ways of Being, especially for you tech people. I would say the first chapter of that book should be required reading for anybody in a graduate tech program. He came out of being an internet pundit and got animal woke. They got like climate woke maybe 5-6 years ago. And this book is amazing. Why do we use technology for what we use it for? Why don't we use it to love the planet? It's like just really great open thinking. I also recommend The Dawn of Everything by the two Davids, David Graeber and David Wengrow. That, again, the first chapter of that book about where Westerners got their ideas of egalitarianism and people back in Europe couldn't believe that it was the Native Americans, the indigenous Americans who would possibly thought in a non-carceral model, non-punishment model, in terms of leadership. So totally great books. Yeah.
Awesome. I threw links into the chat for all of those.
Thank you so much for that, John.
We have time for another question or two. If y'all don't pose one, I'm gonna ask another one.
Wait, no, there's a job tips. Oh my goodness. Do I have any job tips? I'm like, oh, I wish I did. I guess no. The answer would be at the moment, no, I don't have any job tips. I live upstate now and I don't live on that much money and I get New York State marketplace health insurance. And I cobbled to get, I'm 60. I just feel like I'm collaging a income together from a variety of sources. So I don't think I'm a very good job tips person at the moment.
I just realized I missed a question from Mateus also. When working on a piece based on data, do you usually begin with the data and build the concept from that? Or do you start with a concept and find some data to support?
It both. So in the world of the temporary expert, you have to run tandem tracks. You have to run the track of inquiry, you have to run the track of availability, and you have to run the track of your conceptual emotional desires. And how you do that is through all kinds of research and experimentation. Because especially when I was teaching full-time, the thing I noticed more than anything was that students don't spend enough time iterating and playing. They think they leave that for last and figure they need to get all this other stuff lined up and in a row. And you miss out on discovering all this accidental discoveries that happen when you play. that could take you in a new direction. I mean, I didn't show you how much stuff I wanted to show you from the crucible photographs, the photo collages of my stuff, how much, where I started from, and in a year I finished those, and how much I threw away just through just trying to explore what to do. And it was very much a visual, emotional or affective problem, but also a very visual problem. Yeah.
Prototype, prototype, prototype.
Play.
Yep. I think I caught all the questions. Now, oh, here's a new one, also from Jonathan. Since you have a very systematic approach, how do you incorporate happy accidents into your work?
Sorry to be a pissant, but systematic and systemic are different things. Systematic means I'm plodding along and I have like a protocol. Systemic is where the happy accidents happen. Because if you think about, you're always juggling like these systems touching on each other, and each of those has emergent properties. The more that you can play inside of systems, the more surprises happen, especially when you're drawing or sketching or making little tiny doodles or trying things out. You're just trying things out. There's no cost. You want to find the lowest cost ways to not be systematic. If you get stuck in a coding hole, you often have already painted yourself into a corner where you're stuck conceptually. So I always say, go back to paper test, play test, with the simplest means possible, because that's the way you discover like what your heart wants to do, which is really important.
I will give a plug here to 5 and 5 exercises in MFABT. I will also, I forgot to say this earlier, but Marina used to teach in MFABT some time ago. I mean, that brings me to a question I had written down earlier. It was actually a statement I wrote down, but drawing as a mode of thinking. And I feel like you just touched on upon that right now. Like how do you engage? What role does drawing and sketching play? I think you kind of just answered that, but if you could maybe elaborate a little more.
Yeah, more and more, I hate the way I draw by hand, and I more and more just say, just draw, because it doesn't matter if you hate it or not, because you're going to learn things. I used to, I used to date somebody who'd say, you need to think with your hands. Just get rid of your brain. Just think with your hands, at least for part of your practice. And so that could be with a smush of clay, it could be with a pencil, it could be with a collage, just anything that gets the ideas out of your brain. You know how much the brain, I mean, this is studied, a couple of things. Taking handwritten notes in class and having to transcribe them is like a whole process of getting out of any autonomic, you get into autonomic modes and you learn through iteration. But there's been also studies on, like there was a really banal, famous article in the New Yorker, best thinking happens while you're bike riding. You know, like you're doing something that isn't expecting your brain to, something to come out fully formed from your brain. A lot of the pressure why I don't like my drawing is because I have like expectations of what my drawing should look like, which it's never going to look like because I don't draw that well. How many times have you imagined something and completely been able to ignore the giant column that's in the middle of the room that you're imagining your installation in? Like the brain is just so capable of ignoring and choosing. Often I draw and then I take a photograph of the drawing so that I can get away from myself and my judgment. I can just, and I might still hate it, but I'll have a different view of it. I'll have a different feeling about it. Yeah.
Awesome. I think on that note, we shall conclude the recorded portion of this. And I will say thank you so much, Marina, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and generosity and talking with us. Yeah, just enough. We'll clap.
Yay, I clap for you all. Good luck with everybody's work. I hope it goes well. Please have some fun.